Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the human exploration ship Aurora and watched the stars through the wide viewing screen. His crew had been mapping the section of space for 3 months now, and they had found nothing but empty systems and dead rocks. The work was boring but important because Earth needed to know what was out here in the dark between the stars. Lieutenant Amy Foster looked up from her science station with worry in her eyes. She had been tracking some strange energy readings for the past hour, and they were getting stronger. The readings did not match anything in their computers, and that made her nervous because human technology was supposed to be the best they had ever created. The communication system suddenly came alive with a sound that made everyone on the bridge stop what they were doing. It was not like any signal they had ever heard before, and it seemed to come from everywhere at once. The sound was beautiful and terrible at the same time, like music made from lightning and thunder. Jake told his communications officer to put the signal through the speakers so everyone could hear it. The voice that came through was deep and powerful and spoke in perfect English, even though it clearly came from something that was not human at all. Primitive species number 7739, known as human, the voice said without any emotion. You will report to Nexus Prime for classification and assignment. Any resistance will result in complete extinction of your species. You have been warned. The message ended as suddenly as it had started, and the bridge fell silent. Jake felt his heart beating fast as he tried to understand what had just happened. Someone or something had just threatened to destroy all humans if they did not obey, and that someone knew exactly where Earth was located. Amy ran her hands through her hair and stared at her computer screen. Captain, the signal came from the Andromeda Spiral, which is over 2 million light-years away. Nothing we know about can send messages across that kind of distance. We are dealing with technology that is so far ahead of ours that we might as well be throwing rocks at starships. Jake walked over to look at her readings and felt his stomach drop. The energy signature was massive, and it suggested that whoever sent the message had power sources that could light up entire solar systems. These beings called themselves superior to humans, and from what Amy was showing him, they might be right. The communications officer spoke up from his station. Captain, I am picking up more signals now. They are not directed at us, but I think they are status reports. It sounds like these beings have been cataloging species across multiple galaxies for a very long time. Jake ordered him to play the intercepted messages, and what they heard made everyone on the bridge feel small and afraid. The voices talked about moving entire populations from one world to another like humans might move cattle. They discussed which species were useful for labor and which ones should be eliminated because they used up too many resources. Amy managed to decode part of the data stream, and what she found was horrifying. Captain, they have records of over 4 million different species, and most of them are marked as either relocated or extinct. They have been doing this for thousands of years, and no one has ever successfully fought back against them. The tactical officer, Lieutenant Ben Carter, spoke for the first time since the message arrived. Captain, what are our orders? Do we run back to Earth and warn everyone, or do we try to learn more about these beings first? Jake thought about the choice he had to make. If they ran home immediately, they could warn Earth about the threat, but they would have no useful information about how to fight it. If they stayed and tried to gather intelligence, they might learn something that could help humanity survive, but they also risked being captured or killed. He made his decision and ordered the ship to change course toward the source of the signal. They would try to get close enough to observe these beings without being detected. It was dangerous, but humanity needed to know what they were facing. As the Aurora moved deeper into unknown space, Jake wondered if they were the first humans to encounter these godlike beings. The message had called humans primitive, and maybe that was true when compared to creatures who could send signals across galaxies. But Jake knew something about humans that these beings might not understand. Humans did not like being told what to do, especially by bullies who threatened their families and friends. Throughout human history, whenever someone tried to rule them through fear and force, there were always those who chose to fight back no matter how hopeless it seemed. The beings who sent that message thought they were gods, and maybe they had the power to back up that claim. But gods could be killed if you knew how to hurt them, and Jake intended to find out exactly how these false gods could bleed. Admiral Lisa Carter stood before the emergency meeting of the United Earth Defense Council and looked at the faces of the most powerful people on the planet. 3 days ago, Jake Morrison and his crew had sent their report about the beings called Zephyrians, and now everyone was trying to figure out how to save humanity from complete destruction. The holographic display in the center of the room showed what their deep space sensors had detected. A fleet of 3,000 ships had appeared at the edge of their solar system, and each one was larger than anything humans had ever built. The vessels looked like they were made of living crystal that bent light around them in impossible ways. Commander Ryan Webb activated his computer and showed the council what their scouts had learned. The Zephyrians have been conquering species for over 10,000 years. Every single race they encountered either surrendered immediately or was wiped out within weeks. They have never faced a war that lasted longer than a month because nothing has ever been able to stand against their technology. Lisa felt the weight of command pressing down on her shoulders. Earth had maybe 6 months before the Zephyrian fleet reached their world, and the enemy had weapons that could crack moons in half. The human fleet consisted of less than 200 ships, and most of them were designed for exploration, not warfare. One of the council members asked the question everyone was thinking, "Admiral, what chance do we have against enemies like these? Should we consider surrendering to save at least some of our people?" Lisa had been expecting this question, and she had already made up her mind about the answer. Surrendering means slavery at best and extinction at worst. The Zephyrians see us as nothing more than animals to be sorted and used as they see fit. I would rather die fighting than live on my knees. The council voted to prepare for war even though everyone knew the odds were hopeless. Lisa was given complete authority over all military forces and told to do whatever was necessary to protect Earth. She walked out of that meeting knowing that she might be the last military commander humanity would ever have. Captain Morrison returned from his scouting mission with intelligence that gave them their first real hope. His science officer Amy Foster had managed to scan several Zephyrian ships without being detected, and she had found something important. The aliens were overconfident, and they had not changed their tactics in thousands of years because they had never needed to. They fight like gods who expect everyone to bow down before them, Morrison explained to Lisa during their strategy meeting. Their ships are powerful, but they move slowly, and they always attack in the same formations. They have never learned to adapt because no one has ever made them fight a real war. Lisa smiled for the first time since the crisis began. Overconfidence was a weakness that humans knew how to exploit, and if the Zephyrians thought this would be another easy conquest, they were about to learn a painful lesson about underestimating desperate people. The first battle took place near Titan when a Zephyrian scouting force arrived to demand Earth's surrender. Lisa had positioned her fleet in the asteroid belt where the smaller human ships could use the rocks for cover and concealment. The aliens came in flying in perfect formation like they were leading a parade instead of fighting a battle. Commander Sophie Miller led the fighter squadrons in the opening attack. Her ships were tiny compared to the crystal dreadnoughts, but they were fast and hard to target. The pilots had trained for months learning to fly between asteroids at full speed, and now that training paid off as they swarmed around the confused Zephyrians like angry wasps. The aliens had shields that could stop any human weapon, but Amy Foster had found a way around that problem. Instead of trying to punch through the shields, the human fighters targeted the space around the enemy ships. They fired missiles that exploded in clusters and filled the area with debris and electromagnetic pulses. The Zephyrian ships started colliding with each other as their sensors were blinded and their perfect formations fell apart. For the first time in 10,000 years, the godlike aliens found themselves outmaneuvered and confused by primitives who refused to follow the rules of civilized warfare. Lisa watched from her command ship as 3 Zephyrian vessels exploded when they crashed into asteroids they could not see. The remaining enemy ships began retreating, and she ordered her forces to pursue them. Human ships that had been built for exploration proved perfect for hit and run attacks as they chased the fleeing aliens across the outer system. The Battle of Titan lasted 18 hours and ended with the complete destruction of the Zephyrian scouting force. Only one alien ship escaped to carry news of the defeat back to the main fleet, and Lisa made sure that ship was damaged enough to make the journey take several weeks. Sophie Miller's voice came over the communication system as she led her fighters back to base. "Command, this is Eagle Squadron returning from patrol. The gods bleed just like everything else, and that means we can kill them." The victory celebration was brief because everyone knew this was only the beginning. The main Zephyrian fleet would not make the same mistakes as the scouts, and they would arrive ready for a real fight. But something had changed in the way humans looked at their enemies. The aliens were not really gods, no matter how powerful their technology might be. They could be surprised and they could be beaten if humans were smart enough and brave enough to find their weaknesses. Lisa began planning for the next battle, knowing that humanity had already achieved something no other species had managed in 10,000 years. They had made the Zephyrians retreat. The crystal towers of prism stretched toward the stars like frozen music, and inside their gleaming halls, the Zephyrian High Council gathered for the first emergency session in over 1,000 years. Archon Veltar stood at the center of the chamber, and his ancient form pulsed with colors that showed his deep confusion and growing anger. For 10 millennia, the Zephyrians had ruled the galaxy without question. Every species they encountered either knelt before their divine power or was swept away like dust in a cosmic wind. The very idea that primitive mammals could defeat their forces seemed impossible, yet the reports from the Outer Rim were undeniable. War Conductor Zephal projected his memory of the battle into the chamber, so the other council members could witness the humiliation for themselves. The images showed Zephyrian dreadnoughts crashing into asteroids like blind beasts, while tiny human ships darted around them like insects attacking a giant. "These creatures fight without honor," Zephal declared, and his crystalline skin flashed with embarrassment. "They hide behind rocks and strike from shadows instead of meeting us in open combat. They have no respect for the proper way wars should be conducted." Archon Veltar studied the battle recordings with growing interest rather than anger. Unlike the younger members of the council, he had lived through the early days of Zephyrian expansion, and he remembered when his people had faced challenges that required actual thinking to overcome. "Look closer at what they accomplished," he told the council. "These humans somehow learned to reverse our shield generators and turn them into electromagnetic pulse weapons. They studied our formations and found ways to use our own tactics against us. This level of adaptation should not be possible for a primitive species." Meanwhile, on Earth, Dr. Helen Ross worked day and night in her underground laboratory trying to understand the alien technology that Jake Morrison had managed to capture during the battle. The Zephyrian weapons and shield systems were based on principles that human science barely understood, but Helen was beginning to see patterns in their design. Her assistant, Dr. Kevin Park, brought her coffee and looked at the alien devices spread across the lab tables. "Any progress on figuring out how their technology works?" Helen pointed to a crystalline component that pulsed with inner light. "Their entire technology base seems to be built around quantum field manipulation. They can literally bend the rules of physics by accessing dimensions that we did not even know existed. But here is the interesting part. If they can bend reality, then reality must have rules that can be broken." The second Zephyrian fleet arrived 3 months after the first battle, and this time they came prepared for war. 50,000 ships filled the space around Earth's solar system, and their commander, War Conductor Zephal, had brought enough firepower to sterilize every planet in the system. But humanity had not been idle during those 3 months. Lisa Carter had scattered her forces across dozens of star systems and established hidden bases in asteroid fields and empty space. When the Zephyrians arrived expecting to find all human ships clustered around Earth, they instead found a solar system that appeared to be completely abandoned. Jake Morrison commanded one of the deep space strike groups that hit the alien fleet from 17 different directions at the same time. The humans had learned to build their ships smaller and faster, while packing them with weapons designed specifically to exploit Zephyrian weaknesses. Amy Foster had discovered that the alien shields worked by creating distortions in space-time around their ships. Human weapons could not penetrate those distortions, but they had found that the shields themselves could be overloaded by hitting them with precisely timed electromagnetic pulses from multiple angles. The Battle of the Horsehead Nebula lasted for 3 days and became known as the day the gods learned what fear felt like. Zefal had expected to crush the human resistance in a matter of hours, but instead found his massive fleet being picked apart by enemies who refused to stay in one place long enough to be targeted. Human ships would appear out of nowhere to destroy a Zephyrian vessel, then vanish back into the darkness before the aliens could respond. The crystal dreadnoughts that had conquered 1,000 worlds found themselves helpless against tactics they had never encountered before. Sophie Miller led her fighter wings in surgical strikes against the alien command ships. Her pilots had learned to fly in formations that confused Zephyrian sensors and made it impossible for the enemy to predict where the next attack would come from. They had turned warfare into an art form based on speed and unpredictability. Ross made her breakthrough on the second day of the battle, when she finally cracked the quantum encryption that protected Zephyrian communication systems. What she found changed everything humans thought they knew about their enemies. "Kevin, you need to see this immediately," she called her assistant over to look at the decoded messages. "The Zephyrians are not as all-powerful as they want everyone to believe. Their technology is based on a quantum network that connects every member of their species to their homeworld. Take away that connection, and they become just another alien race with fancy weapons." The information was immediately transmitted to all human forces, and Lisa Carter began planning the next phase of their impossible war. If the Zephyrians could be cut off from their source of power, then humanity might actually have a chance to win this fight. On the third day of battle, Zefal made the decision that shocked the entire Zephyrian Empire. Faced with losses that he had never imagined possible, the great war conductor ordered his fleet to retreat. As the crystal ships fled toward deep space, human pilots cheered over their communication channels, but Jake Morrison felt no joy as he watched the alien fleet disappear into hyperspace. The humans had won another battle, but they had also learned something terrifying about their enemies. The Zephyrians were not invincible, but they were desperate, and desperate gods were the most dangerous kind of all. General Chris Turner stood in the command center of his flagship Defiance and watched as human forces coordinated attacks across 7 different galaxies at the same time. In just 2 years, humanity had gone from a single planet species to leading the largest rebellion the universe had ever seen, and Turner was amazed at how quickly everything had changed. The liberation of enslaved worlds had started by accident when Jake Morrison discovered a Zephyrian prison planet while scouting enemy territory. The aliens had been using the native population as slave labor for their crystal mines, and when human forces freed the prisoners, they gained valuable allies who knew how the Zephyrian Empire actually worked. Word of human victory spread quickly through the underground networks that connected oppressed species across the galaxy. Races that had been slaves for thousands of years began to hope that freedom might actually be possible, and they started reaching out to offer whatever help they could provide. Amy Foster had become the head of human intelligence operations, and she coordinated with resistance groups on dozens of worlds. Each liberated planet provided new information about Zephyrian technology and tactics, and slowly humans began to understand how their enemies had maintained control for so long. The Zephyrians rule through fear and the illusion of divine power, Foster explained to Turner during their daily strategy meeting. They make examples of any world that resists to keep the others in line, but they actually have far fewer ships than most people believe. Most of their empire is held together by the belief that resistance is hopeless. Turner nodded as he studied the star charts showing current operations. Human forces were stretched thin across an impossible amount of space, but their strategy of inspiring rebellion rather than conquering territory was working better than anyone had expected. Every world that threw off Zephyrian rule became a base for further operations. The breakthrough that changed everything came when Captain Lisa Graham and her science team managed to capture an intact Zephyrian command ship during a raid on the Rigel system. Dr. Ross and her research team had finally gained access to the quantum computers that controlled alien technology, and what they found was the key to winning the war. "Chris, you need to see this immediately," Ross called Turner to her laboratory aboard the captured ship. "The Zephyrians have been lying about their abilities for 10,000 years. They are not naturally godlike at all. Their powers come from a network of quantum stations that amplify and distribute energy from their homeworld." Turner looked at the holographic display showing the quantum network that connected the Zephyrian Empire. Massive stations called nexus points served as relay centers that beamed power to every alien ship and soldier across the galaxy. Without that connection, the Zephyrians would lose most of their advanced capabilities. "It is like a wireless internet connection," Graham added as she pointed to the network diagram. "Cut the signal, and they become just another species with conventional technology, still dangerous but no longer godlike." Turner immediately began planning Operation Godfall, which would target all 7 Nexus stations simultaneously. The attacks would have to be perfectly coordinated, because if even one station remained active, it could maintain power for the entire network. Humanity would get only one chance to pull this off. Colonel Danny Hayes volunteered to lead the assault on Nexus 7, which was the most heavily defended station in the network. His team of Marines had trained for months learning to fight in zero-gravity environments, and they were ready to face whatever the Zephyrians could throw at them. The assault began at exactly the same moment. Across 7 galaxies as human forces struck at the heart of alien power. Hayes and his Marines used specially designed ships that could phase through Zephyrian shields by matching their quantum frequency, and they appeared inside the crystal corridors of Nexus 7 before the defenders knew they were under attack. Fighting inside a Zephyrian station was like battling inside a living jewel where walls pulsed with energy and gravity could shift without warning. The alien defenders were 12 feet tall, and their crystalline skin could deflect most human weapons, but Hayes had come prepared with quantum disruptors that could shatter their molecular structure. The battles raged for hours as human forces fought their way toward the central cores of each Nexus station. The Zephyrians threw everything they had at the attackers, including warriors who could bend space around themselves to become nearly invisible. But human determination proved stronger than alien technology. One by one, the stations fell to human assault teams, and each victory weakened the quantum network that gave the Zephyrians their godlike powers. Hayes reached the core of Nexus 7, just as the last of his Marines were being overwhelmed by enemy reinforcements, and he manually detonated the quantum reactor that powered the entire station. Across the galaxy, Zephyrian forces suddenly found themselves mortal for the first time in their species' history. Ships that had moved faster than light now struggled to reach half that speed, and weapons that could atomize planets barely scratched the hulls of human vessels. The gods had fallen, and their empire began crumbling immediately. Turner watched the tactical displays as Zephyrian fleets either surrendered or fled toward the edges of known space. Some alien commanders tried to fight on using conventional weapons, but they were quickly overwhelmed by human forces who had been preparing for this moment for 2 years. Sophie Miller led her fighter squadrons in pursuit of fleeing Zephyrian ships, and she could hardly believe how quickly the mighty enemy had collapsed. "Command, this is Eagle's squadron reporting that the crystal ships are running like scared children. Whatever you did to them worked perfectly. But not all the Zephyrians were ready to accept defeat." Intelligence reports indicated that a faction led by Archon Veltar had retreated to the empty regions between galaxies, where they were attempting to develop new weapons that did not depend on the quantum network. Turner knew that humanity had won a great victory, but the war was far from over. The Zephyrians were desperate now, and desperate enemies were always the most dangerous. He ordered all human forces to remain on high alert while they consolidated their control over the liberated territories. As news of the victory spread across the galaxy, millions of enslaved beings celebrated their freedom for the first time in thousands of years. But Turner could not shake the feeling that the fallen gods were planning something terrible in the darkness between the stars. President Maria Santos stood on the balcony of the former Zephyrian Palace on Prism and looked out at the celebration taking place in the Crystal City below. Representatives from over 4 million liberated species had gathered to form the new Galactic Liberation Council, and the sounds of 1,000 different languages, mixed together in songs of freedom. The fall of the Zephyrian Empire had happened faster than anyone expected once the quantum network was destroyed. Without their godlike powers, the aliens found themselves facing rebellions on every world they had once controlled, and most of their forces simply surrendered rather than fight conventional wars they could not win. Admiral Morrison walked up beside Santos and handed her a report from their intelligence services. "Madam President, we have accounted for most of the Zephyrian fleet, but there are still several thousand ships unaccounted for. Our scouts think they retreated to the void between, which is the empty region between our galaxy and Andromeda." Santos read the report with growing concern. The missing Zephyrians were led by Archon Veltar, who had been the most dangerous member of their High Council, and intelligence suggested he was working on some kind of desperate project to restore their power. The celebration below suddenly seemed less joyful as she thought about what threats might still be hiding in the darkness. Dar Ross had established a research station in the ruins of the Zephyrian archives on Prism, and what she discovered there changed everything humans thought they knew about their former enemies. The crystal beings had not always been conquerors who saw other species as inferior animals to be enslaved or destroyed. "Helen, what have you found in their historical records?" Santos asked when she visited the research facility the next day. The elderly scientist looked tired from weeks of studying alien data, but her eyes held the excitement of someone who had made an incredible discovery. Ross activated a holographic display that showed the early history of Zephyrian civilization. "Maria, they were explorers and scientists just like us about 10,000 years ago. Their society was based on learning and discovery, and they had no interest in conquering other worlds. But then something changed them into the monsters we have been fighting." The records showed that ancient Zephyrians had discovered something in the quantum realm that gave them access to incredible power, but that power had come with a terrible price. The beings they contacted in quantum space had slowly corrupted their entire civilization and turned them into servants who believed they were gods. Santos felt a chill run down her spine as she realized what Ross was suggesting. "Are you saying that the Zephyrians were not the real enemy? That something else was controlling them from another dimension?" Ross nodded grimly. "The quantum entities that gave them their power were using the Zephyrians to harvest other species for some purpose we do not understand yet. The crystal people thought they were ruling the galaxy, but they were actually prisoners who had forgotten they were slaves." Meanwhile, in the void between galaxies, Veltar and his followers worked desperately to transcend their physical limitations and become beings of pure energy. The loss of the quantum network had stripped them of their divine powers, but the ancient Archon refused to accept defeat. He would rather destroy the universe than live as an ordinary mortal. The experiments conducted in the empty space between stars were dangerous beyond imagination. Veltar was attempting to merge his consciousness directly with the quantum realm without using the network that had previously protected Zephyrian minds from being consumed by the alien entities that lived there. One by one, his followers vanished into energy patterns that human science could barely detect, but Veltar pressed on with his research. He had lived for over 8,000 years as a god, and he would not spend his remaining time as just another fallen tyrant hiding in the darkness. The breakthrough came when Veltar successfully contacted the quantum entities directly and offered them a bargain. Instead of working through mortal servants, he proposed that they should remake the physical universe entirely and rule it as beings of pure thought and energy. Santos was meeting with the Galactic Liberation Council when the first reports arrived of reality itself beginning to break down at the edges of known space. Stars were going nova for no apparent reason, and entire star systems were phasing in and out of existence as if the laws of physics had suddenly become suggestions rather than rules. Morrison rushed into the council chamber, with emergency reports from deep space monitoring stations. Madam President, we are detecting massive quantum disturbances throughout the galaxy. Something is causing the fundamental structure of space-time to become unstable, and it is getting worse by the hour. The answer came from an unexpected source. When Jake Morrison received a message from Veltar himself, the ancient Zephyrian appeared as a shimmering figure of light, an energy that hurt to look at directly, and his voice echoed with power that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Foolish mortals, Veltar spoke through subspace communication systems across the galaxy. You thought you had won by destroying our network, but you only freed us from the limitations of physical existence. We have become what we were always meant to be, gods who can remake reality according to our will. The message showed images of the quantum realm where Veltar and his followers had merged with the alien entities that had originally corrupted their species. They had become beings of pure consciousness that could manipulate the basic forces of the universe, but they had also become completely insane with power. Santos called an emergency meeting of all military commanders and scientists to figure out how to fight enemies who could bend the laws of physics. How do we stop beings who can make stars explode with a thought and phase planets out of existence whenever they feel like it? Dr. Ross had been studying the quantum disturbances, and she believed she had found a possible solution, but it would require humanity to take the greatest risk in their history. The quantum realm has rules just like normal space, and those rules can be used against the entities that live there. But to fight them, we would have to enter their dimension directly. Morrison understood what she was suggesting, and he felt his blood turn cold. Helen, are you saying that humans would have to become quantum beings ourselves to stop Veltar and his followers? Ross nodded slowly. It is the only way to reach them, but there is no guarantee that whoever enters the quantum realm would remain human enough to remember why they went there in the first place. As reality continued to break down around them, humanity faced their greatest challenge yet, and Santos knew that the final battle would determine not just the fate of their species, but the future of the entire universe. Admiral Morrison watched reality tear itself apart around his flagship as Veltar and his quantum followers continued their assault on the physical universe. Stars aged millions of years in seconds before exploding into supernovas, while planets flickered in and out of existence like lights being turned on and off by a mad child. The combined fleets of the Galactic Liberation Council tried desperately to maintain formation as the laws of physics changed without warning. Ships found themselves flying backwards through time or suddenly weighing 10 times more than they should as gravity fluctuated wildly across space. "This is impossible," shouted Morrison's communications officer as his instruments registered readings. That made no sense. "Sir, I am detecting 17 different versions of the same star system existing in the same location, and they keep changing places with each other." Dr. Ross had spent weeks preparing for this moment in her laboratory aboard Morrison's ship, and she finally activated the quantum resonance device she had built from captured Zephyrian technology. "Admiral, I am ready to attempt contact with the true source of quantum power, but I need volunteers to enter the quantum realm with me." Captain Sarah Thompson stepped forward immediately along with 20 other crew members who had volunteered for what everyone knew was likely a suicide mission. The quantum realm was not meant for physical beings, and there was no guarantee that human consciousness could survive the transition into pure energy. Ross explained what they had learned from studying the deepest Zephyrian archives. The entities that gave the crystal people their powers are not the true rulers of quantum space. They are prisoners just like the Zephyrians were, and they have been trapped there by something even more powerful. We need to find the real quantum beings and convince them to help us stop this madness. Morrison gave the order to begin the quantum transition and watched as Ross and her volunteers were converted into patterns of energy that existed in both normal space and the strange dimension where thought could become reality. The process looked painful as human forms dissolved into swirling lights that hurt to look at directly. The quantum realm was unlike anything Sarah Thompson had ever imagined. Reality here was fluid and changed based on the thoughts and emotions of whoever was strongest at any given moment. She could see Veltar and his followers in the distance, appearing as towering figures of crystalline light that were reshaping entire sections of space according to their twisted will. But Thompson also sensed other presences in the quantum realm that felt different from both humans and Zephyrians. These beings seemed older and more powerful, but also somehow sad and tired, as if they had been carrying a great burden for millions of years. Ross guided the human team toward these mysterious entities using her understanding of quantum physics to navigate through a dimension where normal rules did not apply. "Remember why we are here," she reminded her volunteers. "We are not trying to become gods ourselves. We are trying to stop false gods from destroying everything." The true quantum beings appeared as shapes that constantly shifted between different forms, as if they could not decide what they wanted to look like. When they communicated with the humans, it was through direct transfer of thoughts and emotions, rather than words or sounds. Thompson felt their story flowing into her mind, and she finally understood what had really happened 10,000 years ago. The quantum entities that corrupted the Zephyrians were criminals who had been banished to this dimension for trying to conquer normal space. The true quantum beings had been trying to contain them ever since, but the prison walls were breaking down. "We have been fighting to keep the mad ones trapped," the true entities explained through waves of telepathic communication. "But they found a way to corrupt physical beings and use them as tools to weaken our barriers. Now they are close to breaking free completely and remaking your universe in their image." Ross realized that humanity had been fighting the wrong enemy all along. The Zephyrians had been victims just like everyone else, and the real threat came from quantum beings who saw the physical universe as raw material to be reshaped according to their insane desires. "Can you help us stop them?" Thompson asked the true quantum beings. "We do not want to become gods ourselves, but we cannot let them destroy everyone we care about." The ancient entities responded with something that felt like laughter mixed with hope. "Your species is different from the others. Most physical beings who enter our realm immediately try to claim power for themselves, but you still remember what you came here to do. Perhaps that is what we have been waiting for all these millions of years." Working together, the true quantum beings and the human volunteers began constructing barriers around the rogue entities who had corrupted Veltar and his followers. It was like building a prison made of pure thought and willpower, and it required perfect cooperation between beings of completely different natures. Veltar realized what was happening and turned his attention toward the humans who dared to challenge his godhood. "Mortals, you cannot comprehend the power I now wield. I will remake your pathetic species into something worthy of serving true divinity." But Thompson and her team held firm against his assault because they were not fighting for personal power or glory. They were fighting to protect their families and friends and all the species that had finally gained freedom from tyranny. Their human stubbornness proved stronger than quantum madness. The battle in the quantum realm raged for what felt like years, but was actually only hours in normal time. Gradually, the true quantum beings managed to reassert control over their domain, and the rogue entities found themselves trapped once again. Behind barriers they could not break, Veltar and his followers were stripped of their stolen power and returned to normal space as ordinary Zephyrians who remembered everything they had done while consumed by quantum madness. Most of them immediately surrendered and begged forgiveness for the horrors they had committed. Ross and her volunteers returned to a physical existence forever changed by their experience in the quantum realm, but still recognizably human. They had seen ultimate power and chosen to give it up because they understood that godhood was a prison that corrupted everyone who claimed it. Morrison watched as reality stabilized around them and the laws of physics returned to normal. The immediate crisis was over, but he knew that humanity had learned something important about themselves during this ordeal. They had the wisdom to refuse ultimate power when it was offered to them. President Santos addressed the Galactic Liberation Council from the former Zephyrian capital and announced that the quantum threat had been contained. "We did not fight to replace one set of gods with another. We fought so that no one would ever again be able to claim divine authority over free beings. The throne of the universe sat empty now, and Santos made sure it would stay that way. Humanity had learned that the greatest power was not the ability to rule others, but the wisdom to know when not to rule at all, and that lesson would be remembered for generations to come.